I just want to thank you for joining
Oh,
me here today. And
uh,
basically, if you don't mind, because I don't have fancy Zoom anymore, I just have
mhm.
regular Zoom. So,
Yeah.
so I don't have a lot of time. Um, so would it
Okay.
be okay if we just got to the questions?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay.
Okay.
I
All
used
right,
to.
let's get right to it. Yeah, and
Okay.
I'll try to be brief. That's tough for me, but I'll try.
I know it's tough for you. Okay, so the first question is obviously, what is the name of your podcast? And uh, briefly, what is it about?
Unfound is about missing people. I interview mainly family members who have had disappearances happen to them, and I interview them. I record the interviews, and then those interviews play during the episodes that come out every Friday. I do nothing but unsolved missing persons cases.
So it's such a unique take on the whole true crimes podcast thing. But why did you initially decide to do this?
First of all, you're right. It is a very niche type of podcast within the true crime genre. I've always been interested in disappearances, even as a kid. Growing up watching In Search of with Leonard Nimoy was fascinating to me. Of course, that show's kind of look back; it's kind of cheesy now, but then it got into the 1980s and unsolved mysteries and cops. And although I never wanted to be in law enforcement, that was always fascinating to me. My friend's father was a part-time cop, so they had a scanner in their house that I always found it was fascinated by that, listening to what's going on out there. And then when the internet rolled around in the mid 1990s, when I still lived in Pennsylvania, one of the first things I did was I started looking up missing persons cases. And it just kind of one thing led to another. So I've always been interested in unsolved mysteries, disappearances, planes going missing, ships going missing, people going missing. It's always just been, I don't know, since I was a single digit age.
Okay, so how is each episode set up? Like, what's your format?
The format is that, first of all, before the episode ever comes out, I do these interviews. Maybe within like 2 weeks of when the episode is going to come out, I record it, then I listen to it, make sure that everything came out well. I'm a person, if I interview somebody for 2 hours, it will play for 2 hours in the episode. I'm not a reporter that interviews somebody for 2 hours and only uses 20 minutes. And I just take out any mistakes or any things that are maybe confusing. Maybe we kind of got off the rails at one point or another in the interview. And then that interview plays during the episodes that come out at 2 p.m. Eastern every Friday. And what happens is the first 7 minutes is me just talking, kind of setting everything up, getting some business stuff of the podcast out of the way, things that are going on with the podcast. And then at about the 8 minute mark, the interview plays for however long it goes. And then at the end, I then end up talking by myself again. And then I kind of sum everything up. Some things that maybe caught my ear during the interview, things that maybe people should concentrate on if they're going to look into this disappearance for themselves. And that maybe goes 5 to 7 minutes, but that's the format every time. Me talking for about 7 minutes, the interview plays, and then me talking for like 5 to 7 minutes in the end, always.
Okay, so how long generally are these episodes?
They can get long, anywhere between an hour and a half, and I had a couple episodes that have easily gone over 3 hours, even up to 4 hours. Although these days, kind of in 2023, I've started to kind of break those up a little bit. So if an episode's going to go over 2 hours, I break it up into two parts.
Oh, okay.
But for the first 6 years, it was if something goes 3.5 hours, it's 3.5 hours.
Okay. So who is your target audience? Who are you looking to, entertain? I don't know if you can call it entertaining, but it
Mhm.
is for a lot of people. So
Yeah, it
who are
is,
these people
unfortunately.
who, you're playing to?
I don't really, I have to admit, I'm not really, this is one of those podcasts, I'm really not playing to the audience. I consider my podcast to be news, so I just cover the news. I'm not looking for a particular demographic, I'm not looking to entertain people. I'm trying to be as informative as possible. My job is to serve the guest and to make do the interview as well as I can, and then put it out there. I really do not gear my podcast at all to the audience at all. Zero. I don't, I'm maybe unique. I don't ask the guests or the audience for suggestions on disappearances to cover. I don't ask them for opinions on how I'm doing or anything like that. I'm kind of a dictator when it comes to that. I have a vision about how disappearances should be covered, and that's the way I do it.
No, it's interesting because the next question is how do you decide on individual topics for
Mm.
episodes? But it sounds like you don't, canvas your audience and say, hey, what should I look at?
No, I don't. The way people get on Unfound is most of the time, 75% of the time, myself or volunteers that help me are reaching out to family members through Facebook pages or websites, emailing them, contacting them, saying, "Hey, I have this podcast. Would love to have you come on, talk about your missing son's disappearance." Sometimes I get suggestions from the audience, but really I only take those seriously if those people actually know somebody in the family or something.
Oh, yeah.
Because if I were to just randomly just take suggestions of disappearances, there's 100,000 disappearance unsolved disappearances in the United States. I mean, I'd just be getting email after email, and that's not very constructive. So for the most part, I'm going out there looking for people, and a lot of times I do that myself.
So you're just researching,
Yep.
basically.
I'm just
Okay.
getting out there, and I have a long list that I'm still working on step by step, reaching out to people, just introducing myself, very like cold calling, as if I were some sort of telemarketer, just
Cool.
emailing people and saying,
Okay.
"Here I am. Here's my podcast. Love to talk to you." Mhm.
So, well, you kind of talked about the prep that you do for the episode. How many hours of research background work do you do?
Quite a bit. Even though the interviews that I do are usually around 2 hours, but I spend a lot of time writing. Do a lot of writing for my podcast because of the script, and I'm the person. The way I do the interviews is that I don't just call the person up and we start talking. We actually follow an outline that I'll put together from the information that I've gathered from talking to them before. And
Mhm.
those outlines can get very intricate. And so that takes a lot of time. That's probably most of my time putting an episode together is figuring out how I'm going to cover this disappearance in a particular order so everybody understands it because we only have one time to get it right.
Right.
Between writing and recording and talking to the people beforehand and just looking into things if I think I need to look into something, maybe look at maps or going back to like newspapers.com to look at old articles about the disappearances. 30 to 40 hours per podcast. I mean, it's like a kind of
Wow.
a full-time job to put
Yeah.
one episode together, but that 30 or 40 hours could be spread out over a month. It just depends.
Okay. So each
It's not usually
episode,
all in one week.
yeah. So you're working on editing one and uh
Yeah.
recording another and
It's
researching for
very
another one.
it's very much an assembly line for sure.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And so you said there's scripted or the outline.
When I interview people, what has happened is that by the time the listeners or I'm recording that person on the record, that's what's going to be public. I've already talked to that person maybe two or three times on the phone or through email, combination of both. And I take notes from all those conversations.
Okay.
And then those notes get turned into an interview outline. So I put this outline, no different than a book report we used to do in elementary school. And I put that together. I send it to the guest. They look it over. They approve it. If there's anything missing, if there are any mistakes or anything else, they get to approve what we talk about. We don't talk about anything that the guest doesn't want to discuss. So they get to look and see here's everything that's going to be discussed. I approve it. So then we follow that outline during an official interview as best as we can.
Okay. So is it kind of timeliney, like you take them through what either what happened,
Right.
what they think happened, or that kind of thing, right?
Right. It's generally we get to know the family first, then we get to know the missing person first, then we talk about issues going on in that missing person's life. Is there a divorce? Was there domestic violence? Were there addictions? Anything like that? Then we eventually get to the circumstances of the disappearance as best as can be told. And then after that, we talk about like what I would call the rest of the investigation. We get more deep into, for example, phone information, car information, what people have said, searches, dogs, social media and everything after that.
So, when you're doing your podcast, what kind of recording equipment do you use?
Depends. When I use, for me, when I'm just recording myself, I'm using GarageBand on my MacBook. And I've been using that since day one. In fact, I've been using GarageBand for many, many years for all sorts of different things before Unfound got started. But when I record interviews, it's either done over here like we're doing here over Zoom,
Mhm.
depending if the person is comfortable with being seen on camera, or I have a Samsung tablet with a voice recorder on it. And so I have my cell phone on speakerphone, and then I have my tablet there, and the tablet records both sides of the conversation.
Oh, so you're recording over your cell phone. You don't. Okay, so what kind of
Yes.
microphone are you using?
Oh, I use this microphone right here, and it's like what is it, a Shure or something? And it's like from about 2006. I like, and I use the old school. I don't use the USB connection. I use an old school microphone, three prong cord, and I use a mobile pre unit that all eventually goes into my MacBook.
Okay, all right.
Very
Um,
old school. Probably no one these days would put that setup together.
hey, whatever works. I am a big fan. Um, so how much editing would you say that you do to each episode?
Not a lot, because being that the interview is already outlined, there's usually not a lot of stuff that I have to take out. If I take mistakes out, of course, being that it's pre-recorded, if we take a break, if somebody has to go to the bathroom or something, those things get taken out.
Right.
But if I take out during a 2 hour interview, if I take out a total of 5 minutes, that's a lot,
Oh,
usually.
wow. Okay.
Yeah. Then, as far as me recording my own self, just for those few minutes before the interview starts and after it, yeah, there's some editing that goes on there. Sometimes, I take some time to really, 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 really get it right, and so I
Right.
record things over and over and over. But really, editing, probably compared to a lot of other podcasters, I don't do a lot of editing because I just kind of go about my process a little differently.
Okay. How have you monetized your podcast?
I get a lot of different monetary streams for my podcast. The main one is that I have a contract with Spotify through their megaphone business that they advertise. That's advertising that is done during the episodes. And what's nice about that, though, is I get to choose where the ads play in the episode because I don't like interviews being interrupted. So interviews, ads play like at the beginning or right before the interview plays or right after because I don't want any advertisers to take over my podcast. I'm the only person who controls my podcast. But that's the main one. That's been the main one the last couple years. But I also have a Patreon account. I also have a YouTube channel that is monetized. I put all of those episodes on there as well, and I do like map videos and other things that I do on there. I do a live show that is also monetized. And also, on top of everything else, given that the work that I do is seen as being helpful to the world and everything, some people will just send me money like through PayPal without even me asking. So that's another nice way, a couple bucks here that shows up in my PayPal once in a while. But it's advertising, it's Patreon, it's YouTube, it's a lot of different things put together.
Okay. So this is your line of work, basically, is
It
what you're
is, yes.
saying.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's unusual. I mean, there are some people that are making a living off a podcast, but
Mhm.
and you happen to be one of them.
Yeah, I'm not making a ton of money. I'm very fortunate in that I keep my expenses low. And all of the work that I did before I ever started this, I saved up quite a bit of money,
Oh,
and so it's kind of a combination of things. The reason I'm able to do this. So yeah. If I was married and had kids or anything, I'm sure my wife would have told me to get a real job by now.
well, it sounds like a real job to me.
It
Um,
is what is. It is. It's just not one that if you're getting into money for getting into podcasting to make money. Good luck to you.
yeah, yeah. So, what advice would you have for someone who's just starting out in podcasting?
Mm. Number one thing is you got to be yourself. Whatever motivates you, whatever gets you up in the morning, that is the way you have to run your podcast. Do not chase fads. Do not trace what is trendy. Do not get into a certain topic just because you think it's going to be popular. Because podcasting is a grind. And I know that had I followed maybe, and I have a lot of different interests, but had I followed something else, I'm going to make this podcast because I'm really interested in this. I don't know if it gets me out of bed in the morning, but I think it's popular and I can have many, 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 make all this money and everything. I don't know if I would still be doing this 7.5 years later after starting Unfound in September of 2016 because it's a grind. And you really have to feel that whatever the topic is, whatever you are doing is really you. Or you're probably going to get burnt out. You're going to probably want to do something else. It'd be no different than a musician who really wants to do country music, but dang it, hip hop's really popular right now, so I'm going to be a hip hop artist. How well is that going to go? This is kind of the way that I look at podcasting. No matter what genre a person picks or whatever else, it has to be a reflection of themselves. That you and the podcast have to be as one.
That's very zen of you.
That's the way I think about it. Like I said, this was a long time coming, 40 years in the making. The technology just had to catch up with my interests.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of time to think about this before I started Unfound is how do you cover disappearances the correct way? And so that's what Unfound is a reflection of myself.
I do want to bring up that the work that you've done actually has ended up being, I mean, articles have been written about you and the
Sure.
work that you've done, and you
Yes.
end up testifying at somebody's trial.
Twice. Twice.
Yeah.
Twice. I hung jury in the first one. Yeah, they convicted him after the second one. I'm actually communicating with that guy in jail right now, Steve Pankey. He's in Colorado in jail for life for the murder of Janelle Matthews. I'm not sure if he did it or not, but yeah, I'm going to be on TV on two different TV shows here in 2024. I was out in Colorado, did some filming for that show in Greeley, Colorado. I'm going to be talking to an FBI profiler tomorrow. Maybe we can get something started there. So I continue to believe if this was just something that I pursued because I thought it was going to be trendy, I'm not so sure a lot of these things would have happened.
Yeah.
But because I thought that this is really how my brain works and what I'm meant to do, this is why all of these, things have happened over the last few years.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it sounds to me, and I've said this to you before, that I think that what you're doing is incredibly important.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you. Thank
thank
you.
you. And thank you for joining me today and talking about your podcast. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome, April. Anything for you, April.
Aw.